We are back as promised, talking about government controls. And this is going to dive a little bit deeper into the regulations that a city will create with their police power in order to keep citizens safe and help protect just the general welfare of individuals. First up is zoning ordinances. So zoning ordinances could be commercial, agriculture, industrial, single family, special use, or another type might be mixed use, where you've got maybe a business on the main level, apartments or condos above it. Kind of what I would call the mullet, again, of real estate: party on the base, or sorry, party up top, business on the base. That would be a mixed use. Zoning ordinances are a big deal because let's say there maybe is an industrial business that does emit a certain chemical, or maybe it's loud because of production. What do you think values would do if we put residential right up next to that business? Probably wouldn't be as valuable. So if you really look at your communities, you're going to see that you've got high density residential, like apartment buildings or condos, that separate single family from maybe a buffer zone like a park. Then that will maybe run into some light commercial, maybe a gas station or a couple of stores. Then that will go into a little bit heavier commercial, businesses, malls, things of that nature. And then you'll get into industrial that's out a little bit further. This not only helps protect values by having this planned urban development, which is this term right here. Having that plan not only helps values, but it really does help the safety and health of our citizens as well. I've referenced here in the example when you were reading the movie Erin Brockovich. Now, if you haven't caught on yet, I like to talk about movies as examples because I think it's something that a lot of us might have some relationship to kind of build and relate, like I said, relate to. Erin Brockovich, if you've not watched it, it stars Julia Roberts. Erin Brockovich was a very real person. She somehow got a job for a law office. This attorney had some sort of an environmental lawsuit come across their desk. She asked if she could start researching it. And what she found is there had been some land next to this electric company that was allowed to build homes very, very cheaply. Well, this electric company was putting out some sort of byproduct that was very, very dangerous, but it was going into the groundwater. I believe it was supposed to be pooled into an area and sealed, but there was a crack in that system that was never regulated by the city. But at any rate, that byproduct that was dangerous went into the groundwater. So the residents that lived and were allowed to build so closely, all of a sudden started to have major nosebleeds, cancer clusters, young women 12 years old having full hysterectomies, and cancer resulting in death. This was a huge, huge lawsuit that was settled. They actually had the opportunity to go to a case where everybody would have maybe gotten a settlement, right? Kind of a civil action where everyone would have gotten an equal portion of the pie. But instead they went and they tried each individual's case and were rewarded millions of dollars because they were able to prove that they knew that this toxin was being released and released probably illegally. Now, this specific gas and electric company is the one who actually settled this multi-million-dollar lawsuit in California. And maybe the rest of the story, whether the city also had some accountability in this lawsuit, but it makes me wonder if maybe they should have. Because again, the rules of how you dispose of a hazardous waste is going to be under government control. how closely you're able to build it to an industrial area. That's going to be a government control as well, that you actually have things that are zoned. And if you want to build something on a piece of property that is zoned differently, you got to have a zoning permit. For many years, I actually did some research for a builder here in the Des Moines area as a very new agent. I did research. So when he would want to buy a parcel of land, maybe 80 acres to convert into residential homes, it was zoned agriculture, he would meet before the zoning committee and we would do a presentation about why you would want to convert that agriculture to residential. And here's where I came in with the research. I went through his past projects that he built, house by house in that development, what it originally sold for, what it was originally assessed for by the county, what it was currently assessed for, and then a sales price if it had recently sold. And what I found is from 1990, when that project was created, at least when I was researching at the time, to when I was doing the presentation in 2005, 15 years, the assessed values of those properties had almost doubled, which is a great presentation to that city. You want me to build again because I've got provable data that the value of the land increases, which results in more property taxes for you as a city. It allows you to put in better streets, better education systems, and possibly attract a lot of new businesses, which helps with employment, right? See how those things kind of fester around with each other? That's where you would get a zoning permit if something was going to be used differently. A building permit allows you to actually present what you're going to be building on that property. And then an occupancy permit actually comes in and says, yes, this is safe. It was built to our building code standards. People can move in safely. These building codes, I think I mentioned them a little bit when you were talking about deed restrictions and doing that review with encumbrances in your last section. Building codes are, there's some basic uniform building codes on a national level, and then each city individually might have specific building codes as well. This is what focuses on safety, 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 and it is regulated by the city. 2x4s for your framework have to be so many inches apart. Floor joists have got to be so many inches apart because we don't want anyone falling through a wall or falling through the floor, right? Whether rebar be in or concrete, all these different things down to electricity and plumbing, right? Those are building codes. Those are building codes. There's another 3 terms that I think you need to know, which is non-conforming use, conditional use permit, and a variance. A non-conforming use would be used for a structure that was maybe built prior to an ordinance, like a building code. And they're going to allow that homeowner to still use their property. They're not going to require everybody redesign their properties to meet new building codes. But if the structure were to burn down, you may not be able to rebuild it right where it was located without some sort of variance. So, for example, I've given an example here of a garage burning down, whether it would be able to be rebuilt in the same spot. I personally have a non-conforming use. I've got what I'm going to call a weird second driveway at my property. Originally, the folks that built this home, I think, used it to store a motor home or some sort of recreational vehicle like that. But literally that second driveway goes right up to the property line of my neighbor. And by today's building standards, there would need to be a setback of it of, I believe, at least 10 feet. So I thought about taking out that driveway because it was kind of weird. I don't have an RV to park there. Several people get confused about where they're supposed to park when they come to visit me because of it. So I did consider getting rid of it and just putting grass there. And then I decided no, because if I ever wanted it back, I probably would not get approval, because once I abandoned it and tore it out, they probably would not let me grandfather that in. And once I destroyed it, I now have to adhere to the new setback rules. So I've left it because I've got a non-conforming use allowance. Conditional use permit, a great option for this for you to remember is if something is zoned agriculture, but you wanted to build a church on it, you could go before the zoning regulation committee of your city and apply for a conditional use permit that would allow a mixed use property to be built on an agriculturally zoned piece of land. Variance is the last one. And this allows folks to get basically a special agreement with the city to move forward with the project, even though it maybe doesn't fit current building standards now. The example that I have given here, which is a great one that I've worked with in my career as well, is I had some clients with a very narrow piece of property in Des Moines that they wanted to build on. But if they use the 10-foot standard setbacks that were in place now, they would have built a house this wide. Would have been like a shotgun home down in New Orleans. Would have been very narrow and deep. But what they did is they went to the city, and the city gave them a variance. And they said, you know what, we will let you build it according to what the standards were when the other homes in the neighborhood were built. Well, the other homes in the neighborhood were built in the late 30s and early 40s. And those setback rules were only 5 feet at the time. So that allowed us to build a structure that was a little bit wider, which 10 feet on each side might not sound like a lot, but it's really an extra bedroom if you think about a standard bedroom size being 10 by 10. So it really was helpful. That's a variance where they basically allowed the homeowner to use building codes for when the time other homes in the neighborhood were built. Private controls. We talked about these yesterday with deed restrictions as an encumbrance. Private land use controls are often created by a developer or a homeowners association, and that's who regulates them. And if you remember what we learned yesterday, those are going to be maybe architectural requirements in terms of style and use of the property, how you can use it. Building codes up here are regulated by the city and they're for safety. Now, I personally think a great exam question could be have a question that is pitting building codes against these deed restrictions. Again, building codes are by the city. They are for safety. The city regulates it. Private controls or deed restrictions are made by a developer or a homeowners association. And they restrict usually the style and the use of the structure. And they are regulated by a developer or an association. Okay, so just keep that in mind because those two may be pitted against each other. And another example of a deed restriction that I thought of too when building or when buying real estate, maybe if it's not built from the ground up. I've always heard that Walmart, for example, when they originally built their Walmarts and now in cities, they're building the super Walmarts. They abandoned the original Walmart and they built a new, bigger structure that now includes groceries and oil changes, etc. The challenge with those old buildings, my understanding why they sometimes sit there vacant, is because they created a deed restriction that says when you buy that property, you agree not to sell anything that would compete with the new Walmart. So that makes it very difficult when they sell everything, right? That means that businesses can't sell dog food or grass seed And it makes it very, very difficult for folks to want to buy it. So that's just kind of another idea of a deed restriction I thought I would include as we were talking about building properties. Up next, you will start talking about valuation, comparable market analysis, and appraisals. After this review,